Welcome to day 2 of Innovators Connect. I'm your host, Brian Ardinger. I'm Director of Innovation at Nelnet and founder of InsideOutside.io, where we produce a podcast and weekly newsletter about talent, technology, and the future of innovation. And today, we are so excited to moderate this panel with our special guest today, Patrick van der Pijl. Patrick is an amazing guy. He's one of the godfathers of all this lean startup innovation theater stuff, and also the cool strategy stuff that you're going to be seeing. So Patrick is CEO of Business Models, Inc. He's a worldwide keynote speaker, best-selling author, renowned business model strategist, and he founded Business Model as a global design agency focused on everything from visual design and how you apply that to strategy and that. So welcome to the show, Patrick.
Thank you. The introduction is awesome.
Well, I'm excited to have you. We're going to, the way this is going to work, we got a couple housekeeping things. We are on Zoom here. So if you have questions that come up throughout Patrick's presentation, please do put them into the Q&A box. And that's the little box at the bottom right on your Zoom. You can put the Q&A at any particular time. At the end of Patrick's presentation, we'll hopefully open up for some of the questions that come in through that. So please, we want to make this as interactive as possible. Please, if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A box. And with that, we are going to try to switch over to Patrick's screens and get started. Patrick, any questions before we get started?
No. What I found very interesting is like what we see this real acceleration of these digital experience right now. So that's really fun. But what is also fun that when I tried to share my stuff, it didn't work on my laptop, right?
That's right. We're living in a different world of disruption. Everybody's facing it. Most of us here. I'm based in the United States, so I'm just working on my first cup of coffee. Folks in the Europe maybe a little bit further ahead on the technology and stuff. So here we go. With that, I will turn it over to Patrick. Thanks very much for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so this picture was created by our designer because it really feels right now that we are in a very different situation. For us, the first 2 months of the year, also with our clients, it was something that looked very similar than last year, and then a little bit of growth. But that these times really changed. So if I go to the next slide, I see that it's actually about a digital shift. So what is interesting is I just handed in a script for my new book, and this is all about business model shifts, because when you analyze where value creation is going, then you can see predominantly 6 big shifts. One is from shareholder to stakeholder, one is from linear to circular. We also see from singular to exponential, and also one is about the digital shift. And if you look at the next slide, then we ask ourselves then, okay, so where is value next? So we know that the business model you have right now will be something different when you look at the edge of innovation. But now these shifts, you see that it is really about an acceleration of the digital shift. So in the next slide, you will see that what important to note first is I'm always looking at these models as a kind of looking through the lens of the business model canvas. And this was in my office in San Francisco where we created this graffiti. But what I like about that is that it makes this understanding very simple. So therefore I like to show you this lens and we take it through the presentation. So if you look at the next slide, then I have to warn you one thing. What I've seen is right now also in this COVID times is when you reinvent your business model, you will see in the next slide that people think that right away you can replace your old business model that is broken. For example, like KLM, Air France airline in Europe. I got a question from a journalist who said, what do we need to do in order to keep up with this crisis? Well, you can't replace your business model instantly because that means you have a startup and you start to grow initially in 2 or 3 months' time towards this amazing big revenue that you had before. That's impossible. The other one that's also important to notice, the next one, the next slide, is that the winning business model to find that is also a long-term search. And you can accelerate this, but it means that you have to look outside more often. It's just the same as any other craft. You have to become better and better at it. So in the next slide, I see that, what is interesting about innovation is also this digital era is normally we need to put people into a specific framework to become creative, because otherwise it's so hard if you operate in this nowadays world. But right now we have these limitations, right? So we have limitations and therefore we need to innovate. So you see this physical limitations actually create the next slide. What you see is all about this acceleration of a digital shift. So next slide, you will see the what seemed impossible is now possible. And that's interesting, right? Because I've seen various initiatives where we normally work with companies and it's impossible to accelerate innovation. And right now, all of a sudden, things are possible because we set different priorities. So you can also think about your recent initiatives that would not have happened in the pre-corona era, but maybe they happened right now. And sorry for you guys to mention next slide all the time, but that's because of my system doesn't work. And one of our clients, we won a big design award with 2 years ago in Boston. This company is formerly, or actually known as, a water system and sewerage production company. I mean, for these systems, but now they produce these masks for hospitals for free, right? And, like normally innovation was super complicated. And right now, just in a few weeks, they were able to offer this. So impossible things are now possible. If you look at the next slide, then you see that sometimes people freeze in times of uncertainty. But if you look at the next slide, you see that others will step up, and then you see that these shifts emerge. And actually, what do we see right now? So in the next, you see new ways of working. Where normally before, I'm 47 years old. Back in 1995, when I was a trainee at an insurance company, there was this remote working. Never ever happened and never really accelerated until right now. Crazy, in a short period of time. If you look at the next, it's not only new ways of working, it's also new ways of living. We value life in a complete different way. And I had two pictures. One is lovely picture of the family, and the other one that they kill each other because it's also not always they're too happy. But the other one is also interesting, and I'm really questioning if this one is going to pop up shortly as well, because when you look at new ways of consumption, this is in the boulevard of Barcelona, where after, I think, 7 or 8 weeks, people were allowed to go out to do sports. But you really see that people take care of health. They start to look at the food processing industry and think like, what is it that's going to be different for us, and how are we going to live a different life? I also had a conversation with one of my favorite DJs, Roger Sanchez, and he also said that he lived in this oversaturated world. He said, right now, I'm at home in my studio and house in Miami, and I'm streaming this video every single day. I don't need to perform on other people, their platform. I don't need to travel so much through airplanes, through the next clubs and the biggest parties. He said, now for me, this notion of Netflix is really important for me, as I see that they stream right away entertainment into your home, right? So if you look at the next slide, then you'll see that this consumer behavior, which is normally not changing that much, has shifted considerably. So I think now more than ever, these limitations help us to get out of that through digital solutions. And I think that's something that we really need to understand, why this digital shift is really accelerating. So if you look at the next slide, then we see that it is important to understand that basic customer needs are similar. We always need food. We always like to be entertained. Those are basic. But what you see here is this new normal. They unlock new experiences and opportunities. And those companies who can jump on those and understand that well, that's where this game is going to happen. So if you look at the next, then I would like to look into this digital shift. So next slide. this is something that we already knew. Like this is a digital supermarket, and this one is in Europe. And if you look at the next slide, then you see that everything is going through the app. And why I often show this model is because it's very different from a traditional supermarket. So at a traditional supermarket, we have this linear model where we push all these products into warehouses, into distribution centers, into supermarkets, and we throw away half of our food. Right now, it's initiated by an app, and they determine the demand. And here you see it goes through distribution centers, and then it will be delivered at your home. So if you look at the next slide, then we see that this picnic, therefore, they can offer the lowest price. Why? If you look at the overview here, I printed in the next slide the business model of this picnic company, and it's also like any other, like Amazon and so on. So if you look at the right, if you look at the customer relationship, you see on the top right, you see they push the button, they make a selection from this smaller assortment that is feeded right away into the database, onto the suppliers on the left-hand side, and that's how stock is managed. And therefore, 70% less waste, meaning that because also they don't need these supermarket outlets, they can offer these very interesting prices. But what I like most is because of this digital element, it is actually completely changing the business model, but also the way the value chain is organized. And this is something we already knew before Corona, but what we see right now, these guys don't have even the capacity to serve everyone in the Netherlands, for example, because everybody would like to get their stuff at home right now. Okay, one more example that I would like to show you. When you look at New York Times, when you look at these digitization exercise, they used to be known as one of the first newspapers that was out. So if you look at the next slide, then founded in 1859, nicknamed the Grey Lady, was really this penny. They called it the penny paper because it was only costing one single penny. And if you look at the next slide, it was built on advertisement, right? So yes, you needed to pay a subscription, but advertisers were also big time in these newspapers. And when you look at the next slide, you see that they were the first online newspaper. So that was quite interesting. But what is important to know when you digitize, it is not about putting your physical business model online. You know, I'm from a 6 feet under family, and if you send out remembrance cards to people, if you digitize that, it's not about that. It's about creating a different experience. So that's where a few companies or most companies actually fail, because they assume that the business model in the old times, the physical model, can be copied or transformed into a digital model. That's not right. So therefore, they started to cut costs because they couldn't figure out their model. So if you look at the next slide, then you see that this traditional business model is really about readers on the top right. They get access to a newspaper. They buy that through shops and kiosks, and then they pay either with a single item or with a subscription. And on the left-hand side, you see the whole machinery of this newspaper with also printing, logistics, and so on. And the other customer segment are those advertisers, not advertisers, but and they have this access to big audience of readers, and therefore they are willing to pay these advertising fees. So that's the traditional model. If you look on the next pages, it wasn't not about this moving these newspapers online. It was about how to disrupt this. And what I find interesting is if you look at the next, they started to set up a subscription-first business. And I think what is important to know is that, of course, this is not something that is new, but it is about the way they introduced this, because they said, okay, we're only going to pay for subscriptions, and therefore we give online access, and otherwise we don't. What I must say, though, is that with the kind of more business-like newspapers and also with these large audiences, for them it's easier to put it behind a subscription model, whereas for others it's more difficult. But they succeeded. So if you look at the next page, then we said, okay, we really made more money with the print subscription, but we believe that we could grow. And this is a very, very important mindset shift, is that we see that with all business models that make that shift. There's always a time where you need to let go of the traditional business model. Blockbuster never ever said goodbye to the late return fees, right? And here also you see that on the one hand, you need to let go of your former model, saying what Nokia never did, what Kodak never did. But the other thing is they also see that there's a much bigger world out there, because there will be more consumptions and the model will be bigger. And that's something that comes back to a clear vision of what you believe is going to change out there. So if you look at the next slide, they started the project. They started not in the project in 2020, but they called it 2020 a few years ago. And that's also important. If you look at the next slide, is they really started with the customer. What do they really value, right? And like where normally we would sit and wait for this newspaper because we don't have access to other information. Right now, this information, we already have all information. So what is truly important for people that they like? Then the next slide, you see that this task force started to offer new value propositions, also with curating different knowledge, going into areas where they are into cooking and so on. So really a different value proposition from what they used to. Then they also start to bundle different content. And that's really about setting up experiments and see what people like and what they don't like. And if you look at the next slide, then you see that their business model started to change, where you see that there's still single paper sales, but now, right, the revenue model is about subscriptions, and it's a mix of online and offline, a kind of hybrid model. So then you see these readers, local and global, unlimited high quality news and information, and it can go through any device. And what is interesting right now I'm in Europe, also a customer, and I don't need to wait for this newspaper to be printed or to be shipped. So you see that they have been able to connect to a complete different customer segment. And then you see on the left-hand side, it's these activities have changed completely, right? One of the big shocks in this newspaper department was also that now you could measure eyeballs more clearly and understand what articles are more read, right? Well, normally the first pages were only for the big editors or the big journalists. And right now that started to change. So this machine learning and data is now part of their key activities. So yeah, this is what I've seen, that traditional newspaper has changed. And why do we show these models? Why do we like to share them? Is because if you are in this business, or if you're not in this business, you can learn big time and you can make a jump start when you acknowledge what these guys have been doing before and how they are able to create value. So if you look at the next model, I find this one also very interesting. So we know Walt Disney very well. And if you look at the next slide, then we see it's about this exciting experience. But on the other hand, you also see the next slide that is not always that exciting, because you need to be in this waiting lines, right? You say to stand here another 2 hours from this point, right? So what I find interesting, if you look at this digital edition, how could they change the game? So they started to invest big time in this new program, and they called it Disney My Magic Plus. And what is interesting also here is what we see at the end of my deck. This also requires a big vision from somebody who says, hey, I see a different experience, I see something different out there, and I believe that we can create a much better experience. So you have to be bold to invest in this kind of thing. So if you look at the next slide, then you see that they started to put these RFID chips to personalize these experience. So if you look next, then first they also needed to train their people, but because of this RFID, they could track people where they are, where they would go, and then they could make these waiting lines change into a complete different experience. So if you look at the next slide, then you see that through this digital connection, you get much better information about the park. It's not those paper maps anymore. And if you look at the next slide, then you can also see that they've been working with controlling the crowd throughout the park. So right now they can tell you exactly who is where and when, at what point in time, and they can make it more easy for you. So it started to shift into a different customer experience. So if you look at the next slide, then you see that they offer also inline entertainment. And if you look at the next slide, then it's also less waiting time, therefore more entertainment. And of course, here we go, more consuming in shops and restaurants. But you know, like, it is annoying if you go to these parks and you wait for 2 hours for one single ride. It's not worth it, right? So you see right now they have this magical end-to-end experience, but also they know so much more about these customers because this digital element will give them real-time access to who these clients are, what they like and what they don't like. So if you look at the next slide in the business model, then for the ease of use, I used families with kids as this single customer segment. But then you see that into this a box at the bottom, this customer relationships, it's about a personal relationship. Right now, they know everybody who is there out there, and the key activities is not so much hosting and cooking for all these guests, but it's more about analyzing data and optimization of these operations. And what you see here also is that, or just one more back, then you see that in order to be able to do this, it was similar what you saw with the New York Times and also what we see with other clients. They started to create these accelerator programs where they started to do innovation beside the core business, work in these small sprints, try and test and see what that could look like. So I found this interesting example, but another one I wanted to share with you is about Duolingo. And what I find fascinating, I was living in Barcelona for a few years, and then I hated to go to these classes where you need to learn the language. I really thought, like, give me a list of the top key words that you need to learn, right? And it doesn't come from a textbook, right? So if you look at the next slide, then you see that first, like, so many people, I didn't know that they were needed to learn a new language. If you look at the next slide, is that we do have a lack of time and money. I needed to go every time with the metro to the city center, go to these classes, and it was always at the most inconvenient times. If you look at the next slide, then this guy thought, okay, we could really change that game. And what his vision was, is to do it really different. So he said, if you look at the current model for education, and then you see the student pays, like, for example, Rosetta Stone, this company, $500. But the problem is that a lot of people don't have that money. And that's what the starting point for him to create something new. So if you look at the next slide, is that he said, hey, unequal access to quality education. So he wanted to make this available throughout the globe, and then for free. And that's quite interesting because you think, like, hey, how can you do this for free? Of course, if you do that in a digital way, it's less costly than printing books, but still, what does the business model look like? So if you look at the next slide, then you see that they started with a B2B translation model, but if you look at the next slide, it was translated and shifted into a B2C model where you could directly, normally, right, if you have these textbooks, you sell it to B2B and then they sell it to customers. And right now they have direct access. So again, because of this app, you have direct access to customers, and that's a complete shift of how you run the business. And if you look at the next model, then they started to issue these certificates. Sorry for the bad quality of the print. And then if you look next, then they offer this Duolingo for schools. So that's also their customer segment. And if you look at next, then they make money with their advertising. So yes, they offer this for free. They make use of this advertising because they have the big audience who's out there. But if you don't like this advertising at all, you pay a monthly fee of $9-10 a month. And then you get rid of the ads, and you can also get directly access online. But what is interesting, because they have offered this model for free, they have this algorithm that learns about these languages all the single time. So it's a kind of maybe a money machine or a community machine. So if you look at the next slide, then you see it's free, it's fun, it's effective. You look at the next slide. I mean, they completely changed the game of learning languages. And here also, they are there for advertising big time. And next slide, I think we end up with the business model itself, personal experience, right? And this is their business model. So you see, yes, people with the time of lack of money, fun, bite-sized tutoring, whatever you like. And then school and governments, they have this classroom system, which is more easy to use. And if you see at the bottom, it's free. It's a freemium model. So we're free for those who like advertising, and then you pay a premium and they make money with some advertising. And again, in this key resources, in these boxes on the left-hand side, you see the activity is not about tutoring anymore or writing or publishing textbooks. It's really about research the nature of language, a continuous improvement, machine learning based on all this student data, right? So what I like about this model, it's started in the digital era, and they started to grow from here. They didn't make the shift from a physical that much into a new one, although he knew what the problem was about this physical model. Okay, so let's look at the next, because what I see is that, this is the last slide about Duolingo, so step away from language only. If you click on a few more slides, then you see this as a kind of summary. So one slide more, one more. So you see that in each and every box, these boxes started to shift. So in the revenue streams from sales of physical products into digital sales, right? And your channel is started to shift from physical to digital. Your relationship is from transaction to really not knowing who is your customer. And even if you think about me as an author, if I publish, I don't know who is my reader. I have no information. But with Duolingo, it's really out there. For Disney, it's also out there. Because of that, they can increase all the time the value proposition with more and more higher quality and actually contribute to a better world, meaning like no waiting lines, easy language, and so on. When you look at key information, I see there was still a Dutch text popped in, but key activities really started to shift from production towards like understand this customer journey and understand what they like, what they don't like. And into key resources, shifting from legacy systems into data algorithms. And in partners, you see that you used to do it yourself, but now you need to have access and cooperate with partners more than ever to keep this up to date. And your cost structure start maybe to shift from personal and stock, what you saw with this supermarket model, into cost for user design and engagement with customer, and less expensive systems. So this is how this shift can be summarized in a kind of pattern. So like a few more slides if you move forward. So what I see is it requires a leader's mindset. So if you look at the next, then it's about thinking big. And next, it's about leading by example to be digital savvy, right? So all these companies that need to make a shift right now, their leaders should step up and say like, yeah, I'm the first one to adopt this mindset. I'm the first one to invest into these propositions. If you look at this machine, the Service Hub, we invested the last 3-4 weeks into 3 of these systems to be able to instant offer workshops on a global level. So you have to invest. The next one slide is about Ralph. He is a CEO of the biggest media company, one of the biggest in the world. And they saw all these events, all these big television shows being postponed or canceled because of Corona. And now they're in the game of augmented reality. They have this green screen, but they have a complete virtual studio and virtual production. So it was already an invention and an initiative before Corona, but now he plays this game big time. So another one is, so we need to think long-term and not short-term. So that's about the leadership thing. If you look at the next slide, then this digital approach, then I see a few steps in there. So what is important, you saw this through this case study, you have to define these business goals, because otherwise your team or your company or your colleagues will not understand this. If you say the next revenue is going to come for 30% out of digital solutions, then it's clear for people, right? Then they know what they're looking for. If you look at the second one, the second is about explore technology options. You need to know what's out there. And I've been now a lecturer for Singularity University, and like 4 years ago, I explored these exponential technology, and it was a little bit like hocus pocus, not really clear. But now all this technology is out there. Algorithms, it's not a game changer. It's a game changer. It's not that complicated and expensive anymore. The third one is really about test small, go fast, but that's what we already know, nothing new. If you look at 4, then make it personal, because it is about the right mix. It helps you with this newspaper, with New York Times, with Disney, with Duolingo, to get so much more information about your customers. Then the 5th is about think beyond. So if you start to think digital only, do not think about digital on top, because a digital model will be really completely different, as you saw with the supermarket chain. So the 6th, the last one, is stay human. In the end, it's all about human experience. And what I liked is that when we worked with KLM, they said like it's about the customer journey, but it's also about the employee journey. And they need to just come together at this point in time. And yes, mostly digital, but it's very important to understand where these two meet. So what I find interesting is, if you really think about this digital innovation only, we need to be creative of what would that mean in this era. So if you look at the next slide, is if this speed, this time to market is more than ever necessary, how are you going to do innovation, right? So how are you going to make sure that when you need the right people to come together, that you just instantly organize workshops, right? Or that you can digitally run innovation sessions. And yeah, we've been doing this before, but right now, this was a project that we're doing. We instantly offer this workshop with complete environments, and now everybody's excited to be part of that. While normally 2 out of 30 people were excited, right now everybody's excited about that. If you look at the next slide, then you see that this is an app that we use in order to get access directly to customers. So everything we design, we can just throw out to customers. They can create videos. They're super excited about it. And then it's also a digital experience. So there's no way to, after a few months, go out of the building, talk to these customers. No, you have them right on the spot with one single click. And then the next slide is about the same. Responses can be shared real time, and AIs will run in order to collect that information. So I think that if we want to be part of this digital shift that already happened before Corona, I think right now it's also the time that we need to rethink how we do innovation in a super, super fast and efficient way. And that's what this is all about. So a faster innovation pace. And I think that was, I think, you know, like, it's not that you need to call me to get this advice, but what do I mean is that you can't do this alone, right? You see that if you want to speed up, what I see right now, it goes through boundaries. We've been supporting a company in Chicago out of Amsterdam, and we were doing it with all our office teams around the globe, 24/7. We also saw that we need other companies to accelerate on technology, because there's no way that you can develop everything yourself. So I think it's very important to understand that it's not a game that we can play ourselves, but I think it's a very exciting game and also very exciting times.
Excellent.
Phew, that was a roller coaster.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's give him a virtual standing ovation. It's challenging in these times to do these virtual things, but that's part of the innovation process. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A session. We'll try to get some of these answered. I'll start off as people start putting their questions in. But you went through a number of different examples from a lot of different industries. What industries do you feel are better positioned to make the shift from analog to digital? And what are some of the things that you're seeing of either industries or companies that are going to do it better than others?
Yeah, so you know, like what I find interesting is when I had this chat with DJ Roger Sanchez, what strike me is that this music industry have been going through these changes like one of the first, right? And the other thing, what you saw, we were working with a pharmaceutical company, a chemical company, and we worked together with the CTO. And then this board, before Corona, never ever saw the necessity of a digitization of their processes. So right now they saw this change, but before they were going through a restructuring program. So I think that on the one hand, it's driven by what kind of industry you operate in, but it's more driven by the board members who have this digital mindset, yes or no. If they don't support it, it's very obvious, it's nothing new, but I see that all the time. If they don't support that because they have other priorities, then it's not going to happen. And I think also that it's because people can't imagine, on the one hand, what it would look like if you fully digitize that. And they are afraid to look into the unknown and to the uncertainty. They're most comfortable with what they know and what they see.
And that kind of speaks to this next question that came in. Since the transition takes time, if you're going to go from analog to digital and brand new business model, thinking about this, how does a company handle that transition while staying in business? That juxtaposition between your exploiting your existing business model and also exploring something new. How do companies do that?
Yes, you see that there are very many ways to do that. But I think when Steve Blank introduced this notion about search and execute, I think that's the key. But what we see, though, is that still this search side can be accelerated much and much faster. So even though we see that those initiatives are separate for the companies that we work with globally, I do see that it can still be much faster, much more accelerated than ever before. But there's always this notion of others that need to step in and need to judge or need to, and then last time, what we saw is that somebody said, like, this system is conditioned to say no when it comes to this executing model. But when we look at it, it's okay, you have a portfolio of business models. So you have business models in execute, you have business models in search. And for you is the question, where is the value space that you can grow in both sides? And that's what you need to start to manage. So that's also how we look at it. And what I've seen now also with BMW, for example, they have a department designed to take those search initiatives into the execution business. So that's their only responsibility. So you see that, they're trying to handle this in a different ways.
Excellent. Question coming in talking about fast-moving consumer goods, food and drink, beverages, things along those lines. Do you have any best practices or examples that you've seen in that particular space?
Yeah, what is interesting is that I see this as a circular shift where we start to use different resources. So I'm surprised still that in this time, there's not so much information about the food processing industry, but which is actually horrible because the way that stuff is coming through our bodies, that's incredible. But trendwatching.com said at the beginning of the year, hey, there was this notion of this eco identity and being sexy and cool, meaning driving the Tesla, versus eco shame right now, because it's a shame if you don't care about the ecosystem. And what is interesting, I had a conversation with Kees Kruithof, who was supposed to be the follow-up of the CEO at Unilever. He started a company called livekindly.com, where he only produces products that are plant-based. And I asked him, how come that this took off? And he said a few things. One is the minimum equivalent is just as good as the other product. So therefore, we don't care. So the chicken burger is the same as the veggie chicken burger. And the other thing is, now women decide at home what we're going to eat. That's something they know. And now they see this as a very good alternative. And we know right now that these traditional production methods, like this food processing, is very bad. So meat is so bad because we know how much water it needs and so on and so forth. So I see that this is a big shift that's really coming, and I think it will be also accelerated because by us knowing how bad this is for our health.
Excellent. So a couple more questions before we hit the top of the hour. You talk about Disney and some of the transitions they've already made. What do you think Disney, how are they positioned to reimagine the theme park in this low-touch economy? COVID obviously is changing the way people gather in that. What are some of the things that Disney could be looking at or reimagining the theme park?
What I find cool is that like if they open it 24/7, because they can monitor anyway who's in the park because of the devices and so on. So I think that they are better positioned than others who haven't. So what we see also right now in Europe, this notion of Postmates, Instacart is not that big. But right now, because of this crisis, we see this accelerated digitization of their channels. And I think because Disney is already there, for them it's much easier to adapt compared to a theme park that has not introduced this kind of technology.
Yeah, so the evolution that they've already gone through will help them better position for the post-COVID world. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, we're hitting at the top of the hour. I wanted to thank you again, Patrick, for joining us today. Thank everybody who attended this particular session. Continue on the day with some great speakers in that. And thank you very much for being a part of this.
And a special thanks to Amy who took the slides.
Absolutely.
That's really innovation. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.